What happens when a heartless prince, known for his cruelty and arrogance, is suddenly forced into a marriage with the very war general who once swore to destroy him? This isn't just another BL webtoon. It's a tale of forbidden love, political betrayal, and unexpected tenderness hidden beneath layers of hatred. But the question is, can love bloom between two enemies bound by power and fate? In the grand empire of Yue, power was everything. The throne was not merely a seat of honor. It was a battlefield drenched in invisible blood, a crown resting upon daggers, and a prize for which men would lie, betray, and kill. The palace walls themselves whispered with schemes and secrets, holding the weight of centuries of ambition. Ministers bowed low with smiles carved upon their lips, yet their eyes flickered with calculations. Eunuchs carried messages not only for the emperor, but also for those who plotted against him. Servants knew better than to speak, for a single misplaced word could mean their lives, and at the very heart of this treacherous empire stood Prince Liang, the second son of the emperor. To the world, Liang was the embodiment of cruelty. Known far and wide as the cruel prince, his reputation was built upon tales both true and exaggerated. He was said to order punishments without reason, to laugh at the suffering of courtiers who dared displease him, and to treat even his servants as disposable pawns. His words were sharp as blades, his gaze colder than the steel of the empire's finest swords. Children were warned of him in bedtime tales, behave, or the cruel prince will come for you. But rumors, like shadows, often hid more than they revealed. Liang's cruelty was not born of joy, nor of a sadistic heart. It was armor, heavy, suffocating armor, that he had learned to wear in order to survive. The palace was no gentle home for a prince. It was a nest of vipers, and the weak were devoured without mercy. From a young age, Liang had seen brothers, cousins, and ministers alike swallowed by intrigues they did not understand. One wrong step meant disgrace, exile, or death, and so he learned. He learned to smile coldly when others tried to trap him. He learned to speak with venom so no one dared question him. He learned to be cruel, for cruelty was safer than kindness. Behind the mask of the tyrant was not a monster, but a boy who had once been gentle and who had buried that softness so deeply that even he could scarcely remember it. The emperor, his father, was a man of great power but little warmth. To him, sons were not children, but pieces on a chessboard. Liang, as the second son, was neither heir apparent nor irrelevant. He was useful, so long as he played his role correctly. His elder brother, Crown Prince Ren, was the emperor's pride, flawless in public, yet manipulative in private. His younger siblings looked at Liang with a mix of fear and envy, unsure whether to admire his boldness or despise his cruelty. In such an environment, love was a foreign word, trust a dangerous illusion, and so Liang became what they demanded of him, the cruel one, the untouchable one, the prince who would rather sneer than smile. Yet even as he lived this life of calculated cruelty, fate had something far more twisted prepared. The empire of Yue was vast, but it was not stable. At the borders, restless warlords threatened rebellion. Armies clashed like thunder against the empire's defenses, and victory was never guaranteed. The people prayed not to the emperor, but to the one man who stood between them and destruction, General Wei Feng. Wei Feng was the opposite of everything Liang had become. Where Liang was feared, Feng was loved. Where Liang hid behind cruelty, Feng embodied honor. Rising through the ranks not by birth but by sheer skill and loyalty, Feng became the youngest war general in the empire's history. He commanded not only with strategy, but with presence. His soldiers followed him with unwavering devotion, not because they had to, but because they believed in him. Inevitably, their paths collided. Liang detested him. The war general acts as if loyalty alone can shield him. He is naive, a dog wagging its tail at the emperor. He would sneer in court. Feng despised him. A prince who rules through cruelty is not a leader, but a coward hiding behind fear, he once said to a fellow officer. And yet, destiny, merciless as it always was in the empire of Yue, wove their fates together. The emperor, weary of endless conflict, sought to secure absolute control. He knew that loyalty could not be bought with gold, nor secured with promises. To bind the military to the throne, he devised a shocking decree. The cruel prince shall marry the war general. Gasps echoed through the court. Ministers exchanged horrified glances. Soldiers whispered in disbelief. A union between the feared prince and the beloved general was unthinkable. It was not love, it was politics, a chain forged in ceremony and sealed with imperial will. Liang's lips curled into a mocking smile when he heard the decree, though his hands trembled beneath his sleeves. Feng, stoic as ever, bowed to accept his fate, though rage burned in his chest. Neither had a choice. Refusal was treason. Compliance was survival. But survival came with a price. For Liang, it meant that his carefully constructed armor would be tested by the one man who could see through it. For Feng, it meant living side by side with the man he despised, forced to share a bond that neither honor nor loyalty could justify. And so began their story. A marriage not of love, but of war. A bond not of desire, but of chains. Yet within those chains, beneath the weight of politics and pride, something stirred, something dangerous. The cruel prince, who had long forgotten what it meant to feel, would come to know longing again. The war general, who believed loyalty and love could never coexist, would find his heart tested. And the empire of Yue, built on power and cruelty, would soon witness a story far greater than politics, a story of enemies bound together, of pride clashing with honor, and of love, unexpected, forbidden, undeniable, awakening in the shadows of a cruel fate. Yet, behind this fearsome mask, lay something far more complex. Prince Liang wasn't cruel by choice. He was a survivor in a court that devoured the weak. Every harsh word, every sharp glare, every calculated cruelty was armor, forged to keep enemies at bay. Enter General Wei Feng, the youngest war general in the empire's long, turbulent history. His name alone carried weight across the land of Yue. For the soldiers, he was a commander whose presence on the battlefield meant victory. For the people, he was a guardian whose shadow promised safety. For the emperor, he was both a weapon and a threat. Loyal, yes, but too beloved to be ignored. Wei Feng's rise was nothing short of extraordinary. Born not into nobility, but into a modest military family, his childhood was one of discipline, hunger, and survival. Where other boys played with carved toys, Feng held a wooden sword. Where others dreamed of luxury, Feng dreamed of protecting his mother, his siblings, his people. His father, a loyal soldier, fell in battle when Feng was still a boy. His last words had been simple: guard what matters, never yield. Those words became Feng's creed. By the time he was 16, he joined the army not through privilege but through merit. He fought not from the back but at the front lines, shoulder to shoulder with men twice his age. Blood stained his hands but never his heart. For even amid war he remained unshaken in his values: honor, loyalty, and justice. Stories of his courage spread quickly. They said Wei Feng once held the crumbling eastern wall for 3 days with only a fraction of soldiers, refusing to abandon his post. They said he saved villages by riding ahead of his army, warning civilians before battles reached them. They said his voice alone could steady a panicked soldier. In an empire ruled by fear, Wei Feng ruled through trust. It was this difference that set him apart. Where nobles gained titles through inheritance, Feng's titles were forged in blood and sweat. Where princes wore crowns of arrogance, Feng wore scars of sacrifice. Where the cruel prince demanded obedience through punishment, Feng earned devotion through his humanity. His men called him the Empire's shield. The common folk whispered prayers in his name, believing he was chosen by the heavens to protect them. Mothers taught their children, "If you are ever lost, seek General Wei Feng. He will not abandon you." And yet, admiration was a double-edged sword. For the emperor, Wei Feng's growing popularity was both a blessing and a danger. A loyal general was a gift. A beloved general was a potential rival. In a court of suspicion and schemes, too much love from the people was a risk. And in the shadows of the palace, ministers whispered, "What if the general one day desires the throne?" Wei Feng himself never dreamed of power beyond his duty, but in the empire of Yuan, perception mattered more than truth. And the perception was clear. Wei Feng was everything a ruler should be: just, courageous, loyal. Everything that Prince Liang was not. Liang, the so-called cruel prince, and Feng, the empire's shield, two men destined to clash. Liang mocked Feng's righteousness. To him, honor was a weakness, a childish dream in a world of wolves. "The general is blind," Liang once sneered at court, thinking loyalty will protect him. Loyalty breaks the moment fear whispers louder. Feng, in return, held no respect for the prince. He had seen too many soldiers whipped, too many lives dismissed at a prince's whim. "A man who rules through cruelty is not strong," Feng told his officers. "He is merely hiding his weakness." They were opposites in every sense. Liang wore cruelty like armor. Feng wore humility like a shield. Liang thrived in the shadows of palace intrigue. Feng thrived in the open light of the battlefield. One was feared, the other adored. One trusted no one, the other was trusted by all. And yet, fate is merciless in its irony. The emperor, ever cunning, understood both the danger and the potential of binding these two forces together. To keep the general close, he had to tie him to the throne. To tame the cruel prince, he had to give him someone who could balance his poison. And so came the decree that would shock the empire. Prince Liang shall marry General Wei Feng. At first, it seemed absurd. A marriage between the coldest prince and the most honorable general, between cruelty and compassion, between arrogance and humility. The court erupted in murmurs, each minister calculating what such a union would mean. For Liang, it was humiliation. He, a prince of royal blood, forced into marriage with a soldier, even if that soldier was a war hero. His pride burned, yet his smirk never faltered. "So this is father's game," he muttered under his breath, hiding the storm inside. For Feng, it was a chain. His loyalty to the throne demanded obedience, but his heart rebelled. To marry a man he despised, to stand beside the very embodiment of cruelty, it was a punishment disguised as reward. "If this is the emperor's will," he declared before the court, voice steady, "then I shall obey." Yet inside, his honor felt tarnished. The empire buzzed with speculation. Some claimed it was a clever strategy to merge the throne's power with the army's loyalty. Others whispered it was a trap, that the emperor wanted Feng under constant surveillance, tethered by a prince's presence. And among the people, opinions clashed. Some prayed for harmony, others predicted bloodshed. And so, two men who embodied everything the other despised were bound together by chains of duty. Liang, the transmigrated soul, hiding behind cruelty to survive. Feng, the war general, carrying loyalty like a shield no blade could pierce. What neither knew was that beneath disdain lay the seeds of something neither had planned for. Because the cruelest fate of all is not war. It is love. Love that arrives uninvited. Love that defies reason. Love that grows in the spaces between hatred and pride. Liang would test Feng's patience with every mocking word, every arrogant smile. Feng would challenge Liang's walls with every act of quiet strength, every unshakable vow. Their story was not one of choice. It was one of inevitability. For when two forces as opposite as fire and steel collide, the result is not destruction. It is transformation. And thus began the tale of the cruel prince and the empire's shield. A story where arrogance meets humility, cruelty meets honor, and enemies meet a destiny that neither could escape. The emperor, weary of endless wars at the borders, devised a shocking decree. To secure the empire, the cruel prince shall marry the war general. It was a union not of love, but of power, a marriage forged in politics, intended to bind royal blood with military might. The emperor's decree was absolute, and in the empire of Yue, the emperor's word was law. Refusal meant rebellion. Rebellion meant death. For Prince Liang, the announcement was a bitter irony. All his life, he had perfected the art of distance. He had built walls of cruelty so high that no one dared to climb them. His punishments kept people away. His arrogance ensured they never tried. But now, those walls would be tested, not by scheming ministers, not by rival princes, but by a man who carried loyalty like a blade and saw through masks as easily as wind cut through silk. General Wei Feng was no ordinary opponent. He was unshakable, uncorrupted, unafraid. For Wei Feng, it was a humiliation hidden beneath ceremony. To stand beside the very figure he despised, the spoiled, merciless prince who had once ordered soldiers whipped without cause, was a bitter pill. His honor screamed against it, but duty bound him tighter than any chain. He had sworn his life to the emperor, and now that vow demanded a sacrifice more personal than any battlefield wound. He could withstand swords, betrayals, and bloodshed, but could he withstand a lifetime tethered to a man he could neither trust nor admire? The stage was set. A marriage of enemies, a collision of pride and honor, a union forged not in love but in politics. And yet, beneath the hatred, something far more dangerous stirred, something neither man wished to name. Love. The announcement swept through the palace like wildfire. Courtiers whispered in corridors, their fans hiding smirks or gasps. Some ministers celebrated, believing the emperor's plan was genius. The prince, feared but untrusted, and the general, beloved but dangerous. Together, their weaknesses would cancel each other out. Others murmured in doubt, certain the arrangement would only ignite new conflict. The soldiers loyal to Feng were outraged at first. How could their noble general, a man of honor, be tied to the cruel prince? But Feng silenced their voices with a single command. The emperor's will is final. Do not dishonor it with rebellion. His tone carried no warmth, but also no hesitation. He would not allow his men to suffer for his personal burden. Liang, meanwhile, faced a different battlefield. The court of nobility. Princes, princesses, and scheming dukes watched with concealed delight. Many despised him in silence, whispering that he was undeserving of loyalty. Now, they whispered louder, the cruel prince cannot rule without a leash. Even the emperor thinks him dangerous. And so, two men stood at the center of a storm neither had chosen. The marriage preparations began immediately. Red silk draped across palace corridors, golden lanterns lit the courtyards, and musicians rehearsed melodies of joy that clashed with the tension simmering beneath. For the people, the union was celebrated as a symbol of harmony. For Liang and Feng, it was nothing short of a prison dressed in finery. On the day of the betrothal ceremony, the contrast between the two could not have been sharper. Prince Liang arrived in robes of crimson embroidered with black dragons, every stitch a symbol of dominance. His smirk lingered as though mocking the entire event, but his eyes, sharp, watchful, betrayed a flicker of unease. General Wei Feng, in ceremonial armor polished to a mirror's shine, carried himself with a solemn dignity. He did not smile. He did not bow. He simply stood tall, as though the weight of the empire rested on his shoulders alone. When their gazes met, the hall seemed to hold its breath. Liang tilted his head, lips curling into a mocking grin. So, the empire's shield is now my chain. Feng's reply was curt, his voice like tempered steel. And the cruel prince is now my burden. Gasps rippled through the audience, but neither man flinched. Their barbs were weapons, sharp enough to draw blood even without blades. And yet, behind the venom, there was something else. Liang's smirk lingered too long, as though testing Feng's unshakable composure. Feng's glare burned too deep, as though trying to pierce the mask Liang wore so tightly. It was hatred, yes, but it was also recognition. Two men who could not be fooled, two men who could not be bent. From that moment, their lives intertwined like two rivers colliding, violent, unstoppable, and destined to reshape the land they crossed. The marriage was no mere union. It was a challenge. Every banquet became a battlefield of words where Liang provoked with arrogance and Feng countered with blunt honesty. Every private chamber became a test of wills, where silence spoke louder than conversation. The palace itself seemed to watch them, its walls echoing with tension. But slowly, too slowly to notice, cracks began to form in their hatred. Feng witnessed moments of Liang's cruelty that were not cruelty at all, but armor, defenses honed by a man who had survived betrayal and schemes since birth. He began to see glimpses of the boy beneath the mask, the boy who had once been forced to grow claws just to survive. Liang, in turn, saw a strength in Feng that was not naive honor, but deliberate choice. Loyalty was not weakness. Compassion was not foolishness. Feng's unyielding devotion was a fire that refused to die, no matter how the world tried to smother it. And perhaps, just perhaps, Liang envied that fire. Their story was only beginning. In the mighty empire of Yue, power was survival, and weakness meant death. And yet, what could be more dangerous than two enemies discovering that beneath hatred lay something they could not control? Not cruelty, not loyalty, but love, sharp, unpredictable, and far deadlier than any blade. Prince Liang, the emperor's second son, bore the infamous title of the cruel prince. His every word dripped with disdain, his punishment struck fear, and his eyes seemed colder than steel. To the court, he was a tyrant in the making, destined to be consumed by his own arrogance. But Liang held a secret no one could ever know. He was not of this world. Transmigrated from another life, he awoke in the prince's body, forced to inherit a reputation already steeped in cruelty. Every cruel act was survival. Every harsh command was a shield. To live in this palace of knives, he had to play the role of the monster. On the battlefield stood another legend, General Wei Feng. Strong, loyal, and unyielding, he was the empire's youngest war general. Soldiers followed him not out of fear but out of love. The commoners prayed for his victories, calling him the empire's shield. And yet, Liang and Feng were natural enemies. Feng despised Liang's arrogance. Liang mocked Feng's righteousness, until the emperor himself shattered the walls between them. With a single decree, he bound their fates. To secure the strength of the throne, the cruel prince shall marry General Wei Feng. Neither could refuse. Neither had a choice. A cruel prince hiding a fragile soul, a war general with unshakable honor. Two men bound not by love but by politics, and yet, beneath duty and disdain, destiny was weaving a story neither could escape. Their marriage began with silence. On their wedding night, the grand palace glittered with lanterns, yet inside the bridal chamber there was no warmth. Liang sat with his usual smirk, sipping wine, while Feng stood like a soldier at attention, refusing to touch the cup. "Don't worry, General," Liang said with venom in his voice. "I won't waste my time with a man who looks at me like I'm dirt." Feng's reply was sharp. "Then we understand each other." Days turned to weeks, and their union became the empire's favorite gossip. The court expected passion or bloodshed, but what they witnessed was far more complicated. Liang, once cruel, began to falter in Feng's presence. Feng, once proud, found his certainty shaken. In the war council, Liang mocked strategies, but secretly studied maps late into the night. Feng caught him once, candlelight flickering over tired eyes. "You act like a fool," Feng whispered, "but you're not one." Liang smirked, but inside, his heart stuttered. Softly, for the first time, someone had seen through him. The turning point came when rebellion struck at the northern border. The emperor commanded Feng to lead the army and ordered Liang to accompany him as royal oversight. On the battlefield, Liang's mask cracked. He saw soldiers bleeding, heard the cries of the dying, and felt the crushing weight of decisions. Yet beside him, Feng never wavered. One night, as arrows fell like rain, Feng shielded Liang with his own body. "Why?" Liang demanded, trembling. "Because even a cruel prince has a life worth saving." In that moment, hatred twisted into something else. But love was not so simple. Their nights by the campfire grew quieter, their arguments sharper, their glances longer. The empire wanted loyalty, their hearts whispered rebellion. The cruel prince was learning tenderness, the war general was learning desire, and together they were learning that enemies could become something much more dangerous, lovers. The climax came when betrayal struck within their own empire. A coup led by jealous nobles aimed to overthrow the emperor. The conspirators planned to kill Liang first, knowing his death would weaken Feng's loyalty. Captured in the palace halls, Liang faced his executioners. Alone, unarmed, his cruelty would not save him now. But just as the blade was about to fall, Feng stormed through the doors, sword blazing, eyes burning. He cut down the traitors with a fury the court had never seen. At the final strike, Liang collapsed into his arms, whisper tone, "Why do you always save me?" Feng's voice trembled. "Because somewhere along the way, I stopped hating you." Their lips met, not in defiance, but in surrender. A kiss that defied the empire, a confession that rewrote fate. The cruel prince was no longer cruel. The war general was no longer distant. For the first time, They were simply two men falling in love. The coup failed. The emperor lived, and the empire, though shaken, endured. But more than politics, something greater had been won. Prince Liang no longer needed cruelty as armor. He'd learned that strength could come from trust, not fear. General Wei Feng, once bound only by duty, discovered that love could be as powerful as loyalty. Together they became more than just symbols of empire. They became symbols of transformation. For in a world built on power, two men had found something stronger. Not politics, not fear, but love. On-screen keywords: BL happy ending, Prince X general love story, BL manhwa romance. If this story captured your heart, tell me in one word: emotional, romantic, or maybe just fated. Subscribe now for more BL webtoon breakdowns and yaoi manhwa love stories every week. And don't forget, check the description for the full story link and even more BL recommendations you'll love.